the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. For our brief critical reading, I would like to give you a very precise idea about the Canterbury Tales as a whole. Now, Canterbury Tales is supposed to be Chaucer's most popular work, which set out to be a dramatic sequence of stories in prose and verse. Now, what was the occasion? For which reason Chaucer felt the necessity of writing down such a long narrative poem? Now, the occasion was religious and at the same time secular, peculiar. Religious and secular. What is the religious occasion? A group of pilgrims, tirthojatri, a group of pilgrims have assembled together. Where? At an inn, at a Soraikhana, called Tabard's Inn in London, before they undertake a pilgrimage. Pilgrimage means tirthojatra. Before they undertake a pilgrimage, where? To the holy shrine of Saint Thomas Becket at Canterbury, far away from London, right? And as the pilgrims meet together, Chaucer, the poet pilgrim, Chaucer is one of the pilgrims. At the same time, Chaucer is a poet here. Chaucer, the poet pilgrim, together with the host of the inn, host means the owner of the inn, made one proposal. That is, in order to dispel, in order to remove the monotony of the journey, the pilgrims, all the pilgrims, each of the pilgrims will tell stories, one on the way to the shrine and the other one coming back from the shrine. Now, Chaucer never appears to have completed this ambitious project. Except the author himself, no other pilgrim contributes to this ambitious project. But the stories which we get are really, really very interesting. The interest, the fascination of these stories lies in their diversity. The stories are as diverse as the pilgrims are, sociologically, professionally, culturally, and in their attitudes, in their habits. Because the stories range between what is absolutely boring and dull and what is absolutely interesting. The stories are sometimes refined and sometimes very subtle, sometimes very vulgar indeed. So much so that almost some of the stories verge on the border of obscenity. Now, this is in general the pattern, the design of the Canterbury Tales. But our concern is not with the Canterbury Tales. Our concern, our immediate concern is with the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. Now, after having given you a very sketchy idea of the Canterbury Tales as a whole, let me now focus my attention. And why should I simply focus my attention exclusively? I would like to draw your attention to the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. In fact, you will find that the entire text is so important, interesting and fascinating, sometimes entertaining, that it is justifiably, you will feel that it is justifiably included in your syllabus. The question is, which factors? When I say that it is an interesting text, it is a fascinating text, then naturally the question that emerges, which factors are responsible for, which factors are contributory to the enormous interest and fascinating reading of this particular text? In fact, there are several factors which are instrumental in making the prologue a pleasant reading text. Henceforth, I shall not articulate the entire title, A Prologue to the Canterbury Tales. I will simply refer to it as a prologue, right? And therefore, a pleasant reading text. These factors, what are these factors? Number one, these factors are associated with the structure and design of the entire prologue. Number two, this is further associated with Chaucer's excellent art of characterization. And thirdly, this is also associated with Chaucer's extraordinary poetic art, technique, and mode. For example, in the prologue to the Canterbury Tales, we come across very subtle use of irony and humor. We perceive his keen and insightful perception of social behavior, personal habits, eccentricities, whimsicalities, differences in the attitudes of the characters. And what are these characters about? These characters represent the different, diverse, sometimes oppositional cross-sections of the contemporary English society. Now, at this stage, very briefly, I may draw your attention to a basic difference between Chaucer and one of his eminent contemporaries, whose name was William Langland, the writer of Piers the Plowman. Now, in Piers the Plowman, Langland's presentation of the contemporary time, we may suggest, is not as comprehensive, total, is not as panoramic as it is in Chaucer's The Prologue to the Canterbury Tales. Now, after having made these initial and introductory statements on the prologue, let us now make a straightforward journey into the text itself. That is, the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. Now, the prologue, as you might have noticed already, because I may presume that being very dedicated students of English literature, you have perhaps had a bird's eye view of the text itself. And therefore, you might have already noticed that the entire prologue has an interesting opening passage. Opening passage, it begins at line number 1, ends at line number 18, 1 to 18. How does that particular passage begin? The passage begins with reference to the month of April. How? I am reading the particular line, not the entire passage. When that April with his showeress sooty. Meaning the month of April has come. It is a refreshing month. It is the first month of the springtime. এখনকার বাংলা গানের মতন বলতে গেলে বসন্ত এসে গেছে. And therefore, when that April with his showers is sooty. There is the first line. And what is the line number 18? That him hath holpen one that they were seeking. That is the line number 18. Now, these lines, however, have nothing to do with the pilgrims, have nothing to do with the pilgrimage itself. On the contrary, it describes the delightful sensation, joys, pleasures, and excitements prevailing in the face of nature. Why? Because Boshanto eshe geche. Because it is the advent of the springtime. Now, in this respect, Chaucer, however, follows the convention, one particular convention of the European poetry in general. Now, if you read further after MA, after having done your course, you will further read European literature, you will find that in Middle English period, in European literature in general, all kinds of narrative poems used to begin with a description of the springtime. Chaucer also begins the Canterbury Tales with a description of the springtime. Therefore, he follows the convention of the earlier European poetry. And therefore, this opening passage incidentally is important from the examination point of view. Remember this. At any time, in any year, question may be set like this: comment on the significance of the first 18 lines of the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. And therefore, the opening 18 lines serve various purposes. First, Chaucer identifies the jollity in human life with that of nature. The reference to the month of April with showers sute. There is a phrase like that. What is the meaning of that phrase in modern English? Fresh showers. Boshanter সজীব বৃষ্টি. Showers sute, fresh showers. And the drought of March, that is মার্চ মাসের খরার সময়। মার্চ মাসের খরা দূরীভূত হয়েছে কিসের দ্বারা? বাই দ্য সজীব বৃষ্টি of April. Showers sute, fresh showers, has removed the drought of March. Now, this signifies the renewed life of unending joy, youthfulness, freedom of spirit, not simply in the world of nature, but also in human life. Secondly, the pilgrimage in the springtime suggests at springtime all the pilgrims representing the different cross sections of the society have assembled together. Are they hostile to one another? Not at all. They have the common purpose. They will visit the distant shrine, holy shrine at Canterbury of St. Thomas Becket. And therefore, there they will be celebrating universal friendship, fraternity. There will be total breakdown of social barriers, class distinction among the pilgrims. And thirdly, and most importantly, an attempt on part of Chaucer, the poet pilgrim, to secularize what is otherwise a strictly religious journey. This is a journey which is strictly religious. Suppose অমরনাথ যাত্রা করছে, অনেক দূরের পথ, strictly religious journey. সেখানে যদি কিছু পিলগ্রিমস নিজেদের মধ্যে গল্প করে, তাহলে সেটা কি হলো? তীর্থযাত্রাকে সেকুলারাইজ করা হলো, ধর্মনিরপেক্ষ করা হলো। Similarly here, he is secularizing, Chaucer is secularizing what is otherwise a strictly religious journey to the holy shrine of St. Thomas Becket at Canterbury. Since It is impossible to analyze the passage line by line. It is possible, but that requires time. We are working within a very short time limit, and therefore I shall request my friends, I shall request all of you, my friends, to go through the lines one by one, each of the lines very carefully, so that you can grasp, you can understand the poetic essence, the literary spirit, the enjoyable atmosphere which is felt by Chaucer in the first 18 lines of the prologue. Therefore, we can consider the first 18 lines, humorously we can consider the first 18 lines as a prologue to the prologue, isn't it? Now, at this stage, I may also concentrate my attention on the most important area of the prologue, that is Chaucer's art of characterization. Why? Critics have frequently told us that throughout English literature, there are three persons who have delighted in exploring the plenty, exploring the plenty of human life, human characters. These three characters are Chaucer, these three poets are Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales, Shakespeare in his plays, and lastly, my favorite novelist, Charles Dickens. If you read Dickens, Shakespeare, Chaucer, you will come across the sea of humanity, the ocean of humanity. Now, Chaucer, however, has one peculiarity in his art of characterization. That is the arrangement and social description, or the serial description of the figures of pilgrims is referential to the pyramidic structure of the medieval social order. Pyramidic structure. You imagine a pyramid. What is the structure? This is the structure. Now, this pyramidic structure of the medieval social order has been maintained by Chaucer. For example, in the pyramidic social structure, monarchy at the top is succeeded by the representatives of feudalism. Now, who are the representatives of feudalism in Chaucer's prologue? There are three characters. One is the knight. The other one is the young son of the knight, who is called the squire. And the third one is a marginalized, you can say marginalized feudal figure. That is the attendant of the knight and the squire, who is called the yeoman. Now, the feudal lords are being succeeded by the church, the representatives of the church. Remember, in the medieval period, church was a very important social, cultural, religious institution. And who are the representatives of the church? I would like to begin by referring to a female character. Out of courtesy, that is the prioress, followed by monk, friar, poor person of a town, person, P-A-R-S-O-N, modern spelling. Chaucer spelling, P-E-R-S-O-U-N, person of a town, and the minor ecclesiastical figures. Ecclesiastical means related to the church life. The minor ecclesiastical figures like a summoner and pardoner. They are followed by the mercantile class, that is, those who are busy with trade and commerce, mercantile class. And they are represented by, this class is represented by merchant, shipman, followed by the medieval middle class people. Middle class people of the country and the city. For example, a very well-to-do agriculturalist who is called a Franklin, a middle-class character belonging to the country life, a doctor of physique, physician, a middle-class character belonging to the city life, and they are further succeeded by the representative of the guildsmen, ব্যবসায়িক কমিউনিটি, যারা জিনিসপত্র ম্যানুফ্যাকচার করত। তাদের মধ্যে কারা আছে? হু আর দে? ইউ উইল ফাইন্ড আ লিস্ট: আ কার্পেন্টার, আ ওয়েব, আ ডায়ার, যারা কাপড় চোপড় রং করত, ট্যাপিসার, ক্লথ মেকার, and in addition to all of them, there are the socially marginalized figures. For example, plowman, সামান্য একজন ভাগ চাষি, প্লাউম্যান; দ্য মিলার, ময়দা তৈরি করত গমের থেকে; দ্য রিভ। Thus, in the prologue, we may come across a sea of humanity, God's plenty, as Dryden has defined it while appreciating Chaucer, representing the different cross-sections of the 14th century English society, almost a complete and comprehensive demography of Chaucer's own time. The question that initially comes up to our mind is how Chaucer, the poet pilgrim, looks upon them. What is Chaucer's attitude towards them? Now, we may point out in a very brief manner that Chaucer's attitude to them is one of attachment and detachment. I am repeating: attachment and detachment, impartiality and involvement, but never of indifference. Chaucer is never indifferent to them. In fact, Chaucer, as one of the fellow pilgrims, continues to notice, not only to notice, but to scrutinize, analyze, almost pathologically analyze all these pilgrims, all these characters, with critical proximity and the neutrality of an artist who finds enormous delight in the use of mild irony. ক্যারেক্টারগুলোকে ডেসক্রাইব করতে গিয়ে he has used mild irony. There is sarcasm, বিদ্রূপ করছেন, but not bitter sarcasm, pleasant sarcasm, devoid of the pungent bitterness of an intolerant satirist. In fact, Chaucer is never intolerant towards these characters. He is a tolerant, objective observer of his fellow pilgrims with all their drawbacks, characteristic drawbacks, with all their characteristic loopholes, with all their eccentricities and peculiarities. Now, we feel that here is an artist who observes very closely the peculiar contradictions in the social, professional behavior of the persons who happen to be his fellow pilgrims. Now, when I comment all these things, they appear to be rather a surface reading of the text. Where are the textual illustrations to substantiate these points? Obviously, I will not be able to read out all the lines, but for your convenience, for your better understanding, I may perhaps, or I should perhaps, invite your attention to some of the important lines regarding Chaucer's presentation of the ecclesiastical figures, like the monk and the friar. In fact, Chaucer takes much more liberty with these two persons, the monk and the friar, than with any other men and women of other social groups. With apparent innocence, he talks about them as though there is nothing to be found regarding their moral corruption. I have used the word apparent innocence, যেন কিছুই জানেন না এরকম ভাবে ডেসক্রাইব করছেন। Their moral corruption or deviation in their professions. But in the description of the monk, I shall request you to go through the lines. That is, line beginning at 200, ending at 207. That is, description of the monk. Now, in these lines, one realizes there is the use of irony. Irony in the form of understatement. Understatement on part of Chaucer, the poet pilgrim. Now, my friends, my listeners, you have perhaps noticed that I am not merely discussing art of characterization. Together with that, I am also drawing your attention to some of the basic features about Chaucer's role as a poet pilgrim. Now, Chaucer has at his disposal delicate irony that sometimes results in the suggestive ambivalence and enjoyable ambiguity of meaning. This is particularly true about